again. I apologize for that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the broadcast. I'm going to start over again. I've never done this before. We'll edit that out. All right. Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Monday, July 8th, 2024. And tonight we're going to be talking about codependency. I'm actually really excited about this topic because it by far is the most talked about, asked about topic or term that I encounter when I'm doing psychotherapy or psychoeducation. So tonight I'm going to try to give you some different ways to understand it, some really bite-sized pieces of codependency so you can get your handle on it, your handle around it. But also, I also want to debunk some of the common ideas in the treatment field when I hear people talk about codependency. So I'm really excited to do that. Before I get into the topic, the one thing that I want to talk about tonight is our New York City Finding You program. If you're new to this broadcast, Finding You is our 5-day therapeutic immersive process. So we have 7 people come together and we really look at and go into, in a very experiential therapeutic way, your own background, your own family of origin. And that's what the first half of the program is about. The second half of the program then is applying what you've learned about yourself, what we've learned about you to your current day challenges and dilemmas. We believe that the number one thing you can do for your relationships with your partner, your romantic partner, with your family, with your coworkers, with your employees, with your child specifically, the number one thing you could do is to understand your own background, to look back and look at it critically. So if you want to work with me, the only Finding You that I'll be working this entire 2024 will be this New York City, right outside of New York City, July 31st through 4th. There's a spot left for that. So if you want to sign up, check it out. Go to intensives@evoketherapy.com, use the QR code, or go to our website to find out more and to sign up. Now back to codependency. Let me start with something I wrote about codependency to define it. I wrote, codependency is a pattern of behavior marked by a pathological attachment to or over-identification with others. It's best understood as a continuum, one that we are all on. In fact, the creators of the Diagnostic Manual, version 5, decided that they considered including the term codependency in the manual, but they actually were lobbied not to do it by the insurance industry, because if codependency were in the Diagnostic Manual, virtually everybody or the great majority of people would qualify for the diagnoses. Codependent people feel responsible for others' feelings. They also think that others are responsible for their feelings. So, as a result of this lack of differentiation, this lack of individuation, they try to control or change others to manage their own internal state. Excessive guilt, shame, enabling, anxiety are often present in codependency. I think one of the challenges with codependency and understanding it is its name, its term. It was originally developed in the context of working with families where there was an identified patient who was an addict or who was suffering from addiction, some kind of compulsive behavior. And what they first posited was that the codependent person was somehow involved in maintaining this disorder, that they served to rescue the individual, the identified patient, from consequences. They served to make excuses, to be the apologist, if you will. They sacrificed boundaries, didn't hold people accountable. And what they thought was all of this behavior on the part of the non-identified patient, later to be called the codependent, all of this behavior was contributing to the addiction. That was not quite causing it, but in essence, supporting it and maintaining the addiction. So then it became codependency. I am codependent with the person suffering from addiction in my life. That's the idea. Now, today, after decades of thinking about codependency, we don't think about it quite that way, or at least I don't. We think about codependency as a way of being, as an attachment issue. A couple of notes on codependency. Codependency does not cause addiction. And I think sometimes we inadvertently imply that in the field of treatment. I really think we do. And I think it's unfair to both the identified patient and to the family member. And the implication comes mostly in the form of, if you stop being codependent, if you stop practicing or participating in codependent behaviors, then your loved one who's suffering from addiction will remarkably become cured at that point. And if you don't stop it, the suggestion is, then the addict or the person suffering from addiction will fundamentally struggle, and most likely it will be a long, difficult uphill and often unwinnable battle against their addiction. But I want to be clear with you. You can be very codependent. You can be very enmeshed, very poor in your boundaries, very over-identified with other people, trying to control what other people think and feel, trying to manage other people. You can do that and be very high on that codependent scale and not have a child that's an alcoholic or an addict, or one struggling with alcoholism or alcohol use or addiction. Conversely, you can be fairly low on the scale and still have a loved one or a child struggling with addiction. So this notion that one is the cause of the other, one is the determining way of being that maintains the other, is itself a codependent idea. Do you understand that? That if I say to you, if you stop your codependency, your child will stop their addiction, I am, in essence, prescribing the disease. I am saying their addiction is your responsibility. And that is the fundamental psychological error of the individual who suffers from codependency, is that lack of separation between self and other. I then, as a codependent, become responsible for the failures of my children and the successes of my children. And if I just get it right, if I stop struggling with boundaries, if I set clear boundaries, if I hold my children accountable, if I am able to say no, the idea goes, then I will stop their addiction. And that's just not true. The only thing that healing somebody's codependency does is heal their codependency. Healing someone's codependency doesn't cure the addict, just the codependent. It removes you from the dance. It distances you from the dance. So you stop co-participating, you stop contributing, but ultimately and fundamentally, there's no guarantee that anybody in your life will change. So when I talk about, and I talk about this every single broadcast, about doing your own work and specifically going to your own meetings, and I talk about finding you as the best investment in your time and helping your children, I am not saying that if you do all these things that you'll find the solution, the cure for the other person. I'm saying that you'll find your cure. It's the same idea when I talk about parenting more broadly, when I say becoming a healthy parent doesn't change a child. Parent education, in essence, isn't, in this work, the work that I do, is not geared at changing children. Parent education and parenting therapy is geared at changing parents. And that change subsequently can have a wonderful ripple effect, a wonderful influence or impact on another. But we have to stop short of that idea that it's absolute cause and effect. That very idea that the codependent parent is maintaining the addiction with their child is itself a codependent idea. And the reason that psychotherapists will often suggest that, mostly unconsciously, to the parent or to the spouse of the person struggling with addiction, is because they want to guilt or shame them. And that's another aspect of codependency. So the whole thing is messed up. We invite you to do your work. I try to support you through your work with these broadcasts to give you a greater sense of peace, a greater sense of clarity, so that you're not bringing your baggage to your child's crisis, so that you're not bringing your baggage to your partner or your spouse's crises. Like I said, some codependents have people with addiction in their lives, some do not. My experience is that codependency is the fundamental structure of the person that suffers from addiction. If the person is solely and discreetly identified as a codependent, then their drug is people, controlling people. It's the idea that if I can fix my child's disorder, then I will find peace. If I can change my spouse, my wife, or my husband from drinking, then I will have peace. So The idea that codependency is fundamentally different from addiction is a mistake. It's the core issue. The difference is that codependents try to control people, whereas people that suffer from substance use addictions, they take chemicals to change that sense of peace. But both suffer from this fundamental lack of self, this fundamental lack of safety, this feeling of out of control. And that the solution for my distress is out there. Codependency can be like a nice guy, or it can present as harsh, punishing, distant, and cruel. Because the core is about not having a boundary between yourself and others, it can look very people-pleasing, or it can look very cruel, manipulative, and shaming. Like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, when therapists are operating from their own codependency, they will try to guilt and shame their clients. I can't tell you the numbers of clients that I've encountered, especially, and this breaks my heart, especially parents who have a child that's struggling. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories where the parent was made to feel more guilt and more shame because they're causing it. And because the reason that their child isn't getting better is because of their lack of progress. Codependents find telling the truth to be difficult, because if codependency is an attempt to control people outside of me to make myself feel better inside, I'm going to revisit that theme over and over again tonight. If codependency is controlling people so that I feel good, I feel at peace inside, then I'm not going to be as free with the truth. Why do we lie? We lie to control what people think and feel. When people ask me all the time about letting go, that's an aspect that's the antidote, if you will, to codependency. Let go. When people ask me about that, they hear that it's powerlessness in the most negative sense, that it's somebody that's apathetic, that's doing nothing, that's being passive in their lives. And of course, it's just the contrary. The person in recovery for their codependency will boldly, kindly, courageously, and clearly tell the truth to people. And the risk, of course, in telling the truth to people is you have no control over how they react. They can get angry, they can get sad, they can push you away, they can reject you, they can come towards you. Anything can happen. But telling the truth is scarce for us active codependents, because we want to control everything. We want to prevent rejection. We want to prevent isolation or abandonment. So we tell people what they want to hear. The pattern of codependency is most often established by parents who try to control children through emotional coercion. That's where it starts, right? And I'm talking about the child. I've said this many times, that when my first child was born 31 years ago, my thought was, well, great, this is going to be great for him. I'm going to be great for him. I'm in therapy. I work on myself. I'm getting a PhD in psychotherapy. And I'm not going to abandon him like my dad did. So on all fronts, we're in good shape. My son's in good shape. And what I thought was my primary tool, and to me, this is maybe the most common, not the worst, but the most common error that parents make, that people make for that matter, is I thought, I will tell my children when I am sad or frustrated or angry or disappointed or hurt or scared, and that will be their indication that they're doing something wrong. Or conversely, I'll tell them when I'm happy, when I'm proud, when I'm feeling peaceful, when I'm feeling glad, and that will be their indication that they're doing well. And that's the mindset that I came into parenting with. And it, even with all the education, it took me years to pull back the layers and to see that that is the genesis of creating codependency in my children. I am, in essence, saying what I feel about you is about you. What I feel about you is your responsibility. And if you will stop doing drugs so that I feel happy instead of scared, then you're doing the right thing. It seems harmless when you use that example, but then you expand that and you realize that if the child grows up believing that what parents think and feel about them is the truth about them, that it's their responsibility, then they go out into the world trying to make everybody happy. Parent pleasers, in essence, become people pleasers. And then later on, when we people pleasers and parent pleasers become parents, guess what? We become child pleasers. Because we have no fundamental, secure sense of ourselves, we are blown by the whims and the wind of other people's opinions and reactions. So if my children get upset with me, then I'm doing something wrong. So I try to make them happy. And where did I learn that? I learned that from my parents. Because I was told that when my parents got angry, I was doing something wrong. And it doesn't matter that it changes from parents to peers during elementary school and adolescent years, to partners, to children. It doesn't matter that the characters change in this play, if you will. The fact of the matter that the script is the same. If I upset you, if I disappoint you, if I hurt you, I am bad. I'm doing something wrong. If I make you happy, I am good. And I hope it becomes clear to everybody listening to this, watching this, that leaves you in a pretty vulnerable position in life, without a sense of self, without really knowing who you are. Codependency is not dependency. Again, I don't like the word. I wish we could come. Well, there is another word for it. It came long before codependency. It was called an insecure attachment style, an anxious attachment style. That's what it was called originally. But modern psychology loves to rename things that have already been invented, put their flag, if you will, on land that has already been discovered. So dependency is not codependency. And I think some people, when they hear codependency and they hear the word dependency in that, they think, well, everybody's dependent. Everything I do is dependent. Dependency is to rely on another person. And we all have to rely on other people at times. It's part of what makes us human, actually. It's not necessarily pathological. Codependency is to be involved with other individuals in such a way that the sense of self is blurred. The boundaries are blurred. The feelings overlap. So dependency is not the same as codependency. Dependency, by its nature, can be positive or negative. You can easily imagine somebody being too dependent on somebody else, somebody asking others to do for them what they could do for themselves. That's easy for us to imagine. Even though we might not accurately draw the line where it needs to be drawn, we can all imagine, we can even on ourselves of taking dependency too far. But we can also imagine people not asking for help, not expressing their needs, because when they grew up, when they expressed their needs, their parents got upset with them. Their parents got overwhelmed and pushed back. My daughter, Emma Reedy June, who also happens to be our lead facilitator and our trainer at our intensive program, our Finding You program, she once wrote, "Codependency is the illusion you are taking care of someone else when you are really taking care of yourself." The codependent imagines themselves to be selfless. They will say things like, "I only want to do what's best for you." They appeal and strive for that state of virtue. Whereas recovery from codependency means that it's okay for me to take care of myself. And that's my primary responsibility, even as a parent, to take care of myself so that when my child is in need or somebody that I care about is in need, I can be available to them. It's why when you have a new child, all of you that have children can relate to this, and you are deprived of sleep, a fundamental human need, you become impatient, you become reactive, you become neglectful, you make mistakes. Codependency is the illusion that you're taking care of someone else when you're really taking care of yourself. And what I have said over and over again is codependency is looking for outside solutions to inside feelings. If I can manage and control my environment, then I will find peace and serenity. And it's terrifying for me to imagine things being out of control, outside of my control. Related to this, I wrote about this in The Audacity to Be You, where I said, it's common, I hear therapists say this, it's common to conflate love or loving too much with anxious attachment, which is the clinical term really for codependency. It's common to conflate love or loving too much with anxious attachment. Loving too much is a euphemism for the unhealed attachment wound and its expression in an anxious parent. The problem is not loving too much, but rather not enough self. So if you tell yourself or you want to kind of ease the pain of accepting that part of yourself that is codependent. And so you say, I just love too much. I want to remind you that there's really no way to love too much. Love, by definition, is a positive thing. If it starts to be too much, it's not love anymore. It's obsession, it's control, it's codependency, it's an anxious attachment. And so really, the first responsibility we have in all of our relationships is developing that sense of self. And that takes time, much more time than I want to reveal. And in essence, it takes a lifetime. But of course, we can make significant gains that make a difference in our lives. I wrote this in preparation, this diagram. For those of you that aren't watching, for those of you that are just listening to the broadcast, you can always ask for copies of the slides. Just send an email to webinar@evoketherapy.com, and we're happy to send you copies of the slides. But I talked about these two different paths of developing codependency or not, developing a sense of self or not, developing an anxious attachment or a secure attachment. So imagine a traumatic event in a person's life. It doesn't have to be the darkest, worst, most dramatic traumatic event, but just imagine a traumatic event. And I'm going to follow this chart down one path. If we have traumatic events as children, and all of us do, small T examples, being teased, being bullied, something happening in school, whatever it is, it happens to everybody. But the caregiver in this case provides a safe haven, provides attunement, which means they're tuned into what's going inside of the child, not just their behavior, but what the child's feeling and thinking. And that matters to them. So they're attuned. They are present with them. So they themselves are not dysregulated and activated. I always demonstrate this idea that if you go to your child, if your child comes to you and says something difficult, tells you a story, and your response is to gasp in fear, the one thing that your child knows immediately is that you're not safe, that they have to find somebody else. So if the caregiver is a safe haven, if they are attuned, if they are present, if they co-regulate, which means that they are able to keep their nervous system relaxed, relatively speaking. And lastly, the psychoanalytic term is the caregiver is able to be a container. They're able to hold space, to listen without reacting, to listen without judgment, to listen and maintain curiosity, compassion, love, and a sense of self. Well, if they're able to do that, the individual in this case, even in spite of, in the face of the traumatic exposure, the individual, the child, internalizes the capacities of the parent, and the brain becomes wired accordingly. So the person, when faced with trauma, is able to regulate themselves, is able to come back to their body, is able to come back to their breath, is able to respond creatively, doesn't go into a panic or have a panic attack, isn't always on edge or hypervigilant trying to control things, right? The individual internalizes these capacities and the brain is wired accordingly. They're able to find refuge inside themselves or through connections with peers, with others. They're able to find support. And further down this line, if the individual is capable of feeling their feelings without getting overwhelmed, without becoming dysregulated, they maintain their ability to problem solve, to respond to circumstances and situations creatively and flexibly. It's called response flexibility. And they can feel and metabolize their emotions without going into a fight or a flight mode. So that's one pathway of a human being's experience with trauma. The second pathway, experience the same trauma. In this case, the caregiver is reactive. He or she either abandons the child, shames the child, gaslights the child, dismisses the child's feelings, is misattuned to the child, punishes the child with shame, responds with increased anxiety and fear. In this case, the individual experiences overwhelming distress, and the brain is wired for trauma. And in other words, everything starts to operate as if it's a threat. Everything that happens to them is a threat because they're so incapable of regulating their nervous system. Everything has to be managed. Everything is met with force or flight. And then lastly, since they cannot find safety in their body, the individual seeks solutions for trauma in the form of chemicals behavioral addictions, or trying to control people or situations. So the long lesson of this trauma and trauma response cycle that I've just given to you is, if we have parents that have done their work and can co-regulate with us and under trauma, we develop a sense of self and a sense of security and a sense that we're going to be okay. But if we are abandoned or gaslit or ignored or punished when we experience trauma, then our only result is to try to either change our brain chemistry by taking substances, or to try to control the world so nothing bad happens to us. That is codependency, an attempt to control that which is outside of us to deal with an internal state of distress. To define attunement, I just wrote down, attunement is seeing and responding to the child's needs. Codependency is projecting onto the other person your needs and then meeting your needs through the other. I want to make somebody just told me that when they were a little child and they were moving, it was very disturbing to them that they would be moving away from all of their friends in their grade school. So their mother told them when they went looking for houses that they were going to look for a house that had a barn, a place for a horse. This little person loved horses as a child. And so they were momentarily placated. Now, they never got a house with a horse or a barn, but this was a way of the parent, the mother in this case, managing and controlling the child's feelings. She told herself she was doing it to help the child. She told herself she was helping the child with the distress, when in reality, very clearly and simply, she was trying to manage her own stress. If the child in this case was to have been upset or sad or dysregulated, that particular mother at that point in time was of the opinion that she wouldn't be able to tolerate it. So if I can control the child by lying to them, by selling them a story, then I will be okay. And I will tell myself I'm doing it for them. Other definitions of codependency. Codependency has expanded into the definition which describes a dysfunctional pattern of living and problem solving during childhood by family processes. In other words, codependency is a way of being. It's a way of people operating. And it's common in families where there is addiction, because addiction is just another symptom of codependency or an anxious attachment. Codependency is a lay term, meaning it's a popular pop culture term that can be applied to various forms and styles in relating to others where there's a lack of self, a lack of healthy intimacy, or a pattern of healthy intimacy that can take on the form of being overconnected or absolutely disconnected, right? It can look like the attachment style of avoidance or the attachment style of anxious attachment, ambivalent attachment, where the person is constantly holding on and trying to control people. A codependent person is one who has let another person's behavior affect him or her, and who is obsessed with controlling, curing, and correcting that person's behavior. For me, my codependency is most easily recognized when I am obsessing with somebody else, obsessing with something I can't control. But you know, that's my talent, right? I'm a great problem solver. If something presents itself to me, I always said if I fell off a tall building, I would problem solve on the way down. My tendency is, I think if I put enough thought and energy into it, I can come up with a really creative solution. And I often can. But living that way, living on that edge that I can't find safety if the world just does what it does, is exhausting on my nervous system. One of the many definitions of codependency is a set of maladaptive compulsive behaviors learned by family members in order to survive in a family which is experiencing great emotional pain and distress. So again, if the family of origin, either the one that you grew up in or the one that you raised, is experiencing great trauma and stress, and nobody's capable of regulating, everybody's relying on other people, this codependency becomes a core feature of the individuals who come out of that family. We carry around our own internal sense of how much and how to connect with others. We recreate these same qualities essentially in our relationships until we develop a new sense of relating to others. If you come out of a family where you believe that your parents or your siblings' feelings are your responsibility, you will operate that way in the world. You will see yourself through other people's eyes. Like I mentioned earlier, the question gets asked to me all the time: is everybody codependent? Of course, my answer to the question is it's a continuum, and we're all on it somewhere. On the healthy end of the continuum, people have healthy intimacy. They have connection and independence. They have balance, and they can be clear and assertive, which is a sign of having a strong sense of self. On the unhealthy end of the continuum, individuals are marked by the attempt to exercise power over others or control over situations or others. I'm a really good driver. I've had 2 tickets in my life, my entire life. I'm 56 years old, and I've had 2 traffic tickets in my life. Both were for speeding less than 8 miles an hour over the speed limit. That's the complete list of citations for me behind the wheel of a car. And I've been in 0 accidents. Whenever I tell people that, they tell me to knock on wood that it's going to happen eventually. And of course it could. But I am so hyper vigilant when I drive. I'm always expecting everybody else to make a mistake. I'm defensive driving. And you would say, well, that's a great quality, Brad. But it's exhausting. I joke with my wife that when we pull into a parking lot, I've already scanned the parking lot and decided which is the best spot to park in. The spot on the end, or you don't park next to that car. It already has dents in its doors and they don't really care about their car, so they're likely to dent us. Or park next to the handicap spot and just cinch over just close to the line so that you're not going to get a door ding there. Park here because it's in the shade. In my mind, that happens in a split second. And again, those are my gifts, if you will, my superpowers. But I don't get to rest. I don't get to relax. I don't get to just pull into a parking lot and park like everybody else because of my hypervigilance. Relationships on the more unhealthy end of the continuum are marked by managing others and others' crises. People are selfless to a fault. That idea of being selfless is so interesting. When you become selfless, you end up taking and stealing from others. Most codependent people don't realize how much they're taking from other people because they can only see themselves as a giver. They've been shamed by their context, by their history, to believe that self-care is selfish and selfish is bad. When in reality, just like they say on the flight, the pre-flight warning, you have to secure your own mask first. You have to learn to say no. You have to learn to drop balls. You have to learn to let people down. You have to learn to rebel against ideas and situations that no longer serve you. If you are selfless, all of those things become a challenge. Because selfless is to have no self, to have no opinions, to have no needs. I'm always sacrificing for others. So people on this end of the continuum are often passive or passive aggressive. Characteristics of the codependent: poor boundaries, like I've mentioned. I mean, it's not even. I mean, boundaries is an interesting thing to think about. It's lack of a self, and when you don't lack a self, there is no boundary. There is no need. There is no preference. There is no me in the story. The first ingredient, I teach this all the time when teaching lessons like this. The first ingredient in developing intimacy is developing a healthy sense of self. People with codependency often demonstrate poor self-care. Believe me, I know this. They are constantly controlling. They can be passive and covert, or they can be obnoxious and overt. They present a facade, a persona of selflessness, but they end up stealing for others. They end up needing more. They end up sick with health problems, which then become the burden on the very people they were trying to unburden by their selflessness. They tend to want to be perfect because, of course, with codependency, that's the only goal, is to be good. Versus what we talk about in psychotherapy, where the goal is to be a person, to be a self, to be human. A codependent person believes that their love will cure others, so they take on people, partners, as projects. They It's not even quite unconscious. It's more subconscious, just right beneath the surface. They think, and my wife and I would say this about each other, honestly. We've been married 25 years now, and we would say about each other that we kind of knew the other person's issues, but we thought if we just love, I just thought if I love her enough, I can cure her. And she thought the same of me. Codependent people get their needs met indirectly because they're unable to ask them their needs to be met directly because of the shame. And they will not tolerate others in helping them. They blame other people. Of course they do. That's exactly what they've been taught. They blame other people for their problems and for their misery. They blame the child struggling from depression or anxiety or addiction. They write letters in programs saying, it's because of your addiction that I'm so unhappy and I can't sleep at night. Your anxiety, your self-harm, your rebellion, whatever the description of the behavior is, that's what's causing me to be miserable. They take on too much responsibility for problems of other people. They see everything as a cause and effect. If I push all the right buttons, people ask me that in therapy constantly, continuously. What should I do? And really what they're asking is, give me the secret, the hack, the formula for controlling the people around me. I remember this reminds me that I think this is an important story and the illustration of what codependency is and the treatment of it. That years ago when I was presenting at a conference about this, and a psychologist, after I was speaking for a while, raised her hand and asked the question. She said, Brad, how can you imply or suggest to us that we should tell a parent of a drug-addicted child that they should kick that child out of the house at 18? And I apologized and clarified myself. And I said, I'm sorry. I never try to tell parents what to do in these circumstances, especially when the risks of that kind of a choice could end up in death. I would never do that. I would never take that responsibility for a parent and ask them to trust me. But what I would do is I would tell the parent, I would help the parent heal their codependency, and then whatever decision they made would be the right decision for them. Because the codependent doesn't try to find the solution for another person's problem. When they're in therapy, the codependent who's in therapy tries to seek a solution for their own problem, their own distress. Codependent folks tend to place the needs and wants of others first, and to the exclusion of not acknowledging one's own needs. You will find that if you get into recovery for codependency in a formal way, that your decisions, especially with your children or with people in your life that you love that are struggling with addictions and other issues, you will find that your basis, your reference point, your compass for making decisions switches from what's best for them to what's best for me. What do I need? It's like when the mother that was asked by her adult daughter when she was coming home for a break from her treatment center, the young adult daughter said to her mother, will you drug test me while I'm home? Part of this was due to the fact that on a previous visit, the child had relapsed and was at risk of not being allowed back into the program, but convinced the program that they were sincere in trying to reestablish their sobriety in their program. So the daughter asked, she said, will you test me? To the mother, will you test me, do drug tests with me when I come home from my visit? And the mother answered her and said, no, I will not. And I was listening to this story as the mother was telling it, thinking, wow, that's usually helpful for the person struggling with addiction. And the fact that she's asking for it, even more so. But then the mother went on to say something that I couldn't argue with. She said, I told my daughter, I will not drug test you while you're home. If I see it or smell it or it's obvious, I will confront it. But if I test you, I'm putting my codependency, my disease, if you will, at risk. My chance of relapse increases. So I'm not going to take on the responsibility of your sobriety. And oh, by the way, the daughter came home, did not relapse, and the mother and daughter's relationship continued to improve in the months that I was connected to them. Codependent individuals suffering from codependency have difficulty in expressing feelings because they're so worried and measuring how other people may respond to their feelings. They have a very sensitive response to other people's feelings. They are easily hurt and afraid of being rejected by other people. Their self-esteem, their sense of self is they've abdicated it to others. What you think about me is what I think about myself. And if you're upset with me, hurt, disappointed, it becomes overwhelming for me. I will fall in those moments into a deep hole of depression. Codependent folks have a tendency to ignore their own values and attempt to adhere to the values of others. Again, it's all about not having a sense of self, not having one's own needs. They lack assertiveness and direct communication. They have a difficult time telling the truth. One of the most difficult discoveries in my own codependency was realizing that I had been a lifelong liar, that I've been a lifelong people pleaser, that I try to avoid conflict at times at all costs, even my own appropriate and healthy needs. Instead of using boundaries to manage their space or to parent, they use guilt, lecturing, hoping, resenting, expecting, blaming, shaming, arguing. Where does this come from? Like I mentioned, it comes from being raised in homes where we are taught that parents' feelings are the child's responsibility. In other words, the child is taking care of the parent. And the parents don't know this, by the way. The parents experience themselves as loving, good parents. But the messages are consistent and clear that I'm upset because of you. I'm scared because of you. I'm angry because of you. Or I'm proud or I'm happy because of you. Feelings are often restricted, especially in traumatic and stressful situations. Why is that? Well, if the parent can't regulate their nervous system, then they have to have everybody in the family mute or dampen their own intense feelings. In families where codependency is rampant, it's more important to be right than it is to be a person. We learn as children that self-care is selfish and wrong. That getting our needs met directly is not okay. That others' needs are more important than my needs. And family rules become rigid and unexamined, most importantly. The perpetuation that guilt is a barometer of morality and is used to communicate an obligation to care for another person or responsible for another person's feelings. In other words, in codependent families, people are sold on the virtue of guilt as if it is the conscience. But the fact of the matter is, if you get into recovery for codependency, you're going to have to walk through guilt to do the right thing. Getting healthier psychologically and spiritually will cause intense and chronic feelings of guilt. Getting better feels guilty for most everybody. So you have to learn to deconstruct guilt. You have to find a different source for morality. And the one that I would offer is love, starting with yourself. And of course, in families where codependency is rampant, the parents identify with the children and the child's successes. You know, when people congratulate me for things that my children do, it always feels awkward to me. Congratulations, your child got into school or graduated. And my thought, I always say to people when they congratulate me for my children's successes and accomplishments, I always say to them, I'll make sure to pass that on. Because I didn't do it. Now, if you complimented me for being patient in a crisis, I'll say thank you. If you complimented me for being vulnerable and authentic and kind in my communication and assertive, I will be happy to accept that compliment. But to accept the compliment for my child's issues, my child's struggles, is to over-identify with them, is to, in essence, abandon them, to swallow them up so that they don't exist anymore. Family rules also, in codependent families, it's not okay to talk about problems. Feelings should not be expressed openly. Communication is best if it's indirect. Be strong, good, right, perfect. If you watch the movies, the Inside Out, the sequel, Inside Out 2 just came out. All of this stuff is in there. You can see it. In families where it's the child's job to make the parent proud, there is codependency. When my parents have said to me, especially in my adult life, that they're proud of me, it doesn't matter to me. That's not why I'm doing it. And I don't even have the same values as my parents. I don't have the same spiritual belief system. I don't have the same political beliefs. I don't have the same values as my parents. So to be proud of me is irrelevant. And for my own children, I'm reluctant. I always get asked about this. I'm reluctant to tell them that I'm proud of them because I don't want it to be about me. I'll congratulate them. I'll acknowledge and praise them when they do something difficult or accomplish something or work through something. I use phrases like, you can be proud of themselves, but I'm proud of you. I just don't want to be the measure of my child's accomplishments. I don't want them to be looking to make me proud. In families where it's codependency runs rampant, it's about what parents want to teach their children instead of do. In this way of thinking, the way that we teach, it's who you become that makes the difference to your children, not what you say or what you teach. That doesn't matter. It's how you are, the work that you've done, the growth, the healing that you've done to your nervous system, your increased self-awareness, your increased accountability. That's what makes the difference in the connection, the support, the secure attachment of the child. That's what prevents themes of codependency in the child. In families that are codependency is rampant, play is often lacking. Play is kind of the opposite of trauma. Right? Play is to let go. Play is just fun for the sake of fun. It's relaxing, spontaneous. It's like dancing or singing. To be good at it, you have to let go of trying to control what people think. You have to surrender. In families with codependency, the message is don't rock the boat, and that pain and suffering should be prevented at all costs. I have a lot to get to tonight, so I'm going to skip through some things before as we get to the end. Rescuing and enabling. I don't focus on healing codependency on the behaviors that you do. I focus on why you do them. And if you do it from a place of love and awareness and clarity and your own value system, great. If you do it to try to control someone else, I'm going to challenge it. In the spirit of this idea of how it develops in families from a young age, the young woman I wrote who believes she is responsible for her mother's feelings will also feel she is responsible when her friends are upset that she doesn't want to go to a party where there's alcohol. We are the first ones to peer pressure our children. So how do you get out of it? Go to meetings where there are other people recovering from it. Go to Al-Anon. Codependency is kind of an obsession with crisis and drama and chaos. The nervous system is constantly in fight or flight mode. And the antidote is that you focus on what you can control, which is you. It's a great paradox that the more you focus on you, the more effective you are at leading your children to the places that you want your children to go. You have to look back at your own family and challenge the processes of your early family programming. And you practice detachment, letting go. Detachment is attachment in this context. In Buddhism, they talk about detachment all the time, and they talk about attachment as a negative thing. And so detachment in this context, often people will talk about healthy detachment as a stepping stone in the healing and the recovery of codependency. But this kind of detachment that they speak of, this kind of detachment is the basis of what psychologists refer to as a healthy attachment. If I am detached, non-reactive, not trying to control my child, I am more attached to them. I have a healthier attachment to them. I learn to let go of the outcome. It's like being an artist. or a baseball player. If you try to aim the ball, you'll lose all your power and all your accuracy. So you have to trust your swing. You have to trust your throw. You have to trust yourself after all the practice and all the discipline. To learn to replace fear with and anxiety with faith. That's what the great religions of the world are trying to offer and to teach us. With the idea of a higher power, something bigger, somebody knows more than I do. There's a bigger plan than this. There's a greater meaning that I can see in this specific instance. And with that kind of faith, or in Buddhism, it's called radical acceptance, I am out of fight or flight mode. I love the idea of living by the idiot creed. We're all idiots. We're all human. We're also all beautiful and amazing, but we're all idiots. You don't have to be right. You just have to be you. Act as if you matter. Take care of yourself and expect and teach the others around you to do the same. There's a difference between good parenting and raising good children. The former is the project, and the latter is beyond your control. And I'm not even sure that's a desirable thing. And of course, you have to deal with the guilt. Detachment is not detaching from the person whom we care about, but from the agony of involvement. Detachment requires self-regulation. It's releasing or detaching from a person or a problem in love. It's based on the premise that each person is responsible for himself or herself, and that we can't solve problems that aren't ours to solve, and that worrying about it doesn't help. Detachment involves present moment living in the here and now. Detachment involves accepting reality, the facts. It requires faith in ourselves, in a higher power, or in other people, in the natural order and destiny of things in the world. Like I mentioned earlier, healthy detachment is the same thing as healthy attachment in a psychological sense, or it's the prerequisite or the core feature of healthy attachment. Sometimes detachment even motivates and frees people around us to begin to solve their own problem. A good rule of thumb is you need to detach most when it seems least likely or the most impossible things to do. Siegel and Hartzell, when talking about the work that we need to do to develop a sense and a secure attachment in our children, write and say, research suggests that children who have had a positive connection in life have a source for resilience in dealing with life's challenges. And the kind of connection I'm talking about is that ability to attune. And the strongest predictor of a child's well-being is a parent's self-understanding. Isn't that amazing? The author who invented brain spotting, a trauma technique, a technique for helping people with trauma, kind of related to EMDR, if you've heard of that. David Grand said, in psychotherapy speak, there must be a high level of relational attunement, meaning therapists must pay close attention not only to the clients, but also to the dynamics of the relationship between themselves and the client, which mirrors and reveals the client's experience with the primary caretakers of their childhood, especially their mother or their primary parent. Attunement, seeing our children and responding from that place is the greatest investment you can make into the child's resiliency and mental health. And to do that, you have to do your own work. You have to be looking at your own childhood. You have to be looking at your parents. Alice Miller, who wrote the most important book, in my opinion, on child development, The Drama, The Gifted Child, wrote, if a child is lucky enough to grow up with a mirroring, available mother who is at the child's disposal, that is, a child's development, then healthy self-feeling can gradually develop in the growing child. Ideally, this mother should also provide the necessary emotional climate and understanding for the child's needs. But, and I love this, she wrote, even a mother who is not especially warm-hearted can make this development possible if only she refrains from preventing it and allows the child to acquire from other people what she herself lacks. So the teachers, your child's therapists, the softball, the baseball coach, the tennis coach, these are the folks that we let have time with our children because they can do some of this stuff even better than us at times. When a person realizes, Carl Rogers wrote, a great therapist, when a person realizes he has been deeply heard, his eyes moisten. I think in some real sense he is weeping for joy. It is as though he were saying, thank God somebody heard me. Someone knows what it's like to be me. I love this idea. I wrote about this in The Journey of the Heroic Parent. Hearing her observations about how I was currently experiencing and how she tied them to common themes, I would find the answer to my questions. This is when I would go to therapy. Through the process of going to therapy, I found myself each week. It's very difficult to find yourself until you are found by someone else first, she told me. The root of ourself is almost always found through another person. When someone else finds us, my therapist explained, we come to find ourselves. Realizing that I had the answer to my initial question inside of me helped me understand why and how I had been blocked from finding a solution. I love this quote too that I found when somebody said, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Something I've learned in my own work in recovery from codependency is that I don't set boundaries to teach someone else a lesson or to change them. I set boundaries to take care of myself. And again, the shift here is that our boundaries aren't about changing other people. Boundaries are about self-care. But of course, like most of us, I grew in a family and raised my children in a family where being right was the most important thing. Most people don't think feelings are enough, I wrote. They think that they have to be right to prove themselves in a virtual court with the other sitting as judge and jury. But the reality is that our feelings and our best guesses are all we have. Anything else is a paper tiger, something we try to use to influence the opinion of others that we are right. But in fact, boundaries are not about being right. They are about being yourself. In this way of thinking, you don't get to be right anymore, but you do get to be a self. And being a self is so much better. Trying to be a good something or other is the enemy of growth. Trying to be good is the codependent's desire. And it gets in the way of connection, love, and relationship. There's a great difference between loving somebody, for example, and trying to get them to feel love. You have control over whether you love people. You don't have control over what they feel. So we learn to be. We learn to be ourselves. If you want resources to find out more, to participate in codependency recovery, you can go to alanon.org, adultchildren.org, familiesanonymous.org, or codependence.org. Also, the book by Melanie Beatty, Codependence No More, is kind of the Bible of codependency. And also a great book on codependency is by Karen Casey, Codependent and the Power of Detachment. And of course, the more clinical version of this is Alice Miller's The Drama of the Gifted Child. So what are the take home? The take home is being a self, a sovereign self, being who you are is the foundation of all the relationships that we have with other people. We must understand boundaries to understand where we stop and other people start. What's our responsibility and what's not, and vice versa. We have to shift the goal from being right or good. I've talked about this recently in my social media. Stop trying to improve yourself and start trying to love yourself. And the paradox is that when you love yourself more, you'll improve yourself. But if your first goal, if the primary goal is to improve yourself, it will be laced with shame and judgment and self-criticism. It's really a shift from fear to love. It really is. Having a higher power can help because then there's something bigger than you, which you can rely on, which you can rest in the bosom of, so to speak. We have to learn how to lose. We have to learn how to be wrong. We have to accept failure, to be at peace with it, to make peace with, like my book says, to learn to love our horrible, rotten selves. For me, it's really important that I spend time with people who are interested in my boundaries. When I express a preference, a desire, a boundary, and it doesn't violate some core value of theirs, and they respond, those are the people that I want to continue to be around. But if expressing a boundary is seen as a threat, an insult, damage to the relationship, those are the people who haven't developed the sense of self, and it's going to eventually compromise me in the process. So I try to spend time with others who are interested in their boundaries and my boundaries. We must critically look and understand the messages of what it meant to be a self, to love another person. We must uncover what is we must uncover what is the invisible soup that we were cooked in, the air that we breathed as children. And we must, I'm not picking on all parents. I'm just saying that everybody's human, and we were the parents. We were human parents, and we were raised by human parents. And healthy parents who've developed a sense of self, I want my children to know how I dented them. I want them to know of my limitations, my trauma responses, my fallibilities. It's only in doing that they can separate themselves from me and realize that when I got upset or yelled or criticized them or shamed them, that was about me. That was about me trying to control them so that I could feel good. That was about me being the child and them being the parent. Ultimately, the outcome is greater clarity, courage, and serenity. All right, folks, in the spirit of all of that, Other Parents Like Me is an online platform of parent supporting parents that we have recently partnered with. If you would like a free premium membership, you can use Finding You. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. You can go there to buy them, or you can use the QR code here, or just search on Google. We have upcoming intensives. Our Finding You is a deep dive into your own work. It's everything that I was talking about tonight. New York City is the one that I'll be running later in the month, July 31st through August 4th, just outside of the city. We also have a couple coming up July 24th through 28th and August 14th through 18th. We also offer an online version of this that lasts 3 days. July 12th is that offering. All current parents can attend the online version of Finding You for free, or they can apply the cost of that toward an in-person. To find out more, go to our website or email intensives@evoketherapy.com. We have weekly support groups for our current and alumni wilderness families. July 11th is your next support group at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting, a parent alumni-only meeting. July 15th at 6 p.m. is that offering for parents that are a little farther along. And then July 8th tonight, in fact, if you missed it, tonight we had a support group at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and the next one is August 12th for the intensive and coaching clients and alumni. If you would like a virtual coach to work on your codependency, to work on your parenting, to work on your own trauma, to work on your own family of origin stuff like I mentioned, go to coaching, email us at coaching@evoketherapy.com, or go to our website. All of these broadcasts are available on Spotify or your favorite podcast. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast, or go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there. You can also go to Evoke's YouTube channel and you can watch the video rebroadcast of these. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy or @Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. Or you can find the Evoke Intensives program on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. I'm gone the rest of the week. I'll be traveling. I'll be back next Tuesday, and there I'll be taking a live Q&A. If you want to send in questions in advance, send in questions to webinar@evoketherapy.com. If you want copies of tonight's slides, you can use that same email. And then next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, when I come here, I will answer any pre-submitted questions first, and then, of course, any live questions from the audience. I hope this was helpful. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up to these and doing your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.